I saw her shove my wife. Right there. On our front lawn. What the hell was she thinking? My blood ran cold. A familiar kind of cold that had nothing to do with rage and everything to do with quiet. Professional threat assessment. The world around me seemed to blur. The crisp afternoon light. The perfectly manicured hedges. The ridiculous little red flag she was holding. All of it faded to background noise. I heard the sharp, indignant gasp from Sarah, followed by a grunt of surprise. The Homeowners Association enforcer, a woman with a face set like a granite statue and a bob haircut that seemed to hum with self-importance, had just violated the most basic of all rules. You don't put your hands on my family. She was on our property, lecturing Sarah about a single rogue dandelion, a single yellow blossom of defiance, when she reached out and shoved her to make a point. Seriously? A shove over a weed? The absurdity of it all was almost comical. I took a slow, deliberate step forward. The crunch of the gravel beneath my boots a stark contrast to the buzzing silence that had fallen over me. I wasn't angry yet. That would come later. Right now, I was just observing, gathering intel, processing the situation like a training scenario. My heart rate didn't spike. My jaw didn't clench. Years of conditioning had taught me to find the calm in the chaos. To see the chessboard, not just the single pawn being moved. Sarah looked up at me, her eyes wide with shock and a hint of fear. "Mark," she whispered, her voice a tremor. The Karen, who I now knew from a single homeowners association memo as Linda, straightened her shoulders. "Your wife is non-compliant with the landscaping regulations," she announced, her voice as flat and irritating as a dial tone. The arrogance, the sheer audacity of it, was a physical thing. It was an odor, a texture, thick in the air between us. She was impeding my enforcement duties. "And you thought putting your hands on her was the solution?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. I wasn't asking for information. It was a statement, a final confirmation of her complete and utter stupidity. Linda looked me up and down, a sneer forming on her lips. "I am an elected official of the Homeowners Association Board. I have the authority to ensure compliance," she went on. But I wasn't listening. My focus had shifted. It was no longer about the dandelion, or even the shove. It was about her vulnerability, her complete and total lack of awareness. She had no idea who she was dealing with. She saw a suburban dad with a clean-cut beard and a nice lawn. She didn't see the man who spent 12 hours a day running drills for some of the most specialized tactical units on the planet. I train people to identify and neutralize threats. I teach them to exploit weaknesses. I teach them what happens when you make a mistake. I turned to Sarah and put a hand on her back, guiding her gently toward the house. Her shoulders were tight, and I could feel the tension radiating off her. "Let's go inside." "Honey," I said, my voice soft. "We'll deal with this later." From behind us, Linda huffed, a sound of self-righteous victory. That's what I thought. Just follow the rules, and none of this would be a problem. She had no idea what she had just started. As soon as the door was closed, I went to my office. I didn't reach for a bottle or punch a wall. I reached for my laptop. I pulled up the Homeowners Association bylaws, all 300 pages of them. I started cross-referencing, highlighting, taking notes. She wanted to play a game of rules? Fine. I would show her what happens when a professional analyst plays. I knew the regulations for building codes, for fire safety, for property lines. I knew the zoning laws, the county ordinances, and the state statutes that superseded them. Linda's little Homeowners Association manual was about to become a very expensive piece of toilet paper. The next morning, I drove to the county courthouse. It was a Friday, and the place was surprisingly empty. I pulled up the official property records for our neighborhood. I had a hunch. Linda's house, with its perfectly pruned rose bushes and its brand new bird feeder, was built on a slightly different land parcel than the rest of the neighborhood. The developer had filed a separate variance for her lot. A tiny little exception that, when combined with a specific zoning ordinance, meant her property wasn't actually subject to the same landscaping rules as ours. She had no idea. She had been barking at people for years, enforcing rules that, in her case, were entirely voluntary. That was the primary twist. But the secondary twist, the real kicker, was what I found next. A small, decades-old easement for the power company that ran right through her front yard. A legal right-of-way that, technically, the homeowners association had no jurisdiction over. And what had the power company done just last week? They'd installed a new transformer, right where one of her award-winning rose bushes had been. They'd cut a trench. They'd left the dirt. And they'd dropped a massive, ugly gray box, a clear violation of her own, personal, legally binding rules, a violation she had no power to stop. The homeowners association meeting was on Tuesday. The room was stuffy, smelling of old coffee and cheap cleaning supplies. Linda sat at the head of the table, her face a mask of smug authority. As the meeting progressed, she handed out fines like candy. The couple with the slightly overgrown bushes, the guy with the basketball hoop, the woman whose mailbox was 2 inches too short. When my turn came, she smirked. "Mark Thompson," she said, tapping a pen on a printed sheet of paper. "Dandelion violation. Unmown grass. Violation number R31. And a complaint of non-compliance. What do you have to say for yourself?" I stood up slowly, calmly. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't get emotional. I have a few things. Actually, I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. The first was a printout of the county property records. According to the county recorder's office, my wife's action tilling the soil to remove a weed on our private property is protected by state law. Furthermore, I said, pulling out a small flash drive, I have video evidence of MS. Linda shoving my wife on our land. I plugged it into the projector and the grainy footage of her petty assault played for everyone to see. The room fell silent. Her face went pale. The other board members shifted uncomfortably. And lastly, I said, my voice cutting through the tension, I believe it's important to note that MS. Linda has been enforcing regulations that, according to these very same records, do not apply to her own property. And as for her own property, well, the power company just installed a massive, ugly transformer right through her perfect rose garden. A violation of her own rules, which she has no authority to enforce on herself, and certainly not on me. The silence was deafening. Linda's face turned a shade of crimson that would put a fire engine to shame. Her perfectly coiffed hair seemed to droop. The smugness was gone, replaced by a panicked, helpless fury. The other board members, seeing the legal disaster and public relations nightmare unfolding before them, quickly and unanimously voted to remove her from her position. Her little kingdom, built on the shifting sands of an ego and a false sense of authority, had come crashing down. As she stormed out of the meeting, her face contorted with impotent rage, she looked back at me one last time, her eyes filled with a helpless, bitter venom. And for the first time in what felt like a long time, I actually felt a genuine, satisfying smile creep across my face. Justice wasn't always a dramatic explosion or a swift, violent blow. Sometimes, it was a quiet, meticulous demolition, a victory won not with fists, but with a pen and a clear understanding that the greatest power isn't in control, but in the knowledge that you have the skills to handle any threat, no matter how small, no matter how ridiculous.